Hi, I'm Morten Solvik, Vice President of Mahler Foundation and host, writer, and producer of the Mahler Hour, where we bring you the personalities, places, and projects happening right now in the Mahler community around the world. Last month, we kicked off the series Mahler Portraits by presenting the musical works and the life of Mahler's forgotten cousin, Robert, or Roberto Mahler, who enjoyed some success as a composer of opera and light affair in Vienna, and then moved to South America. And I was joined by Chilean musicologist Jose Manuel Izquierdo as we explored this fascinating and sometimes difficult biography, including his impact on musical life in his newfound country. Remember, you can see this show and all past Mahler Hours on our website and on our YouTube channel. For this episode of the Mahler Hour, we're going to ask some questions about the sounds and playing styles we associate with performances of Mahler's instrumental scores. Are we correct in assuming that what we hear today is essentially the sonority that Mahler was operating with as a conductor and composer? Or have differences in instruments and performance practice emerged that we should be mindful of? What, in other words, did Mahler's orchestra really sound like? Before we begin, let me remind everyone attending live to post any questions you might have to the comments section. We will get to these at the end of our show. Don't forget to include your name and the country you are writing from. Also, the Mahler Hour is brought to you by Mahler Foundation. So if you want to support our activities, please become a member. Just go to our website at mahlerfoundation.org for all of the details. I just stated that by asking about Mahler's orchestra may have sounded like. To help us answer this question, I'm happy to introduce our guest today, the conductor and educator, Philipp von Steinaecker. Welcome to the Mahler Hour, Philipp.
Hi, can you see me?
Before we get into the details of your project, let's ask why we need to pursue this fundamental question about the sound of orchestra. It is not difficult to imagine that the orchestral sound has changed since the Baroque period or even the late 18th century, and there are numerous ensembles that have made this abundantly clear. But what has changed in just over a century? And can we really hear the difference?
So, performing styles change basically every day. This is something that changes constantly. We see it, but we see that in everything. Fashion changes, language changes, politics, everything changes. We don't notice it if we constantly go to concerts or buy new recordings. We don't notice it because the change is, incremental. But if you go back, let's say, to the 1960s, and you listen to recordings from the 1960s, there will be lots of things that you notice that are, a bit different to what we do today. And if you go back another 50 or 60 years, obviously there will be more changes. It's less obvious, interestingly, for the time around 1900 because there are no recordings or hardly any. Or if there are any recordings, then they're not, they're not on a technical standard where you want to listen to them all the time. And so we consider this music as part of kind of the modern repertoire, that, that's what we learn in the conservatory to play. And when that's on the music stand, we just go. Everybody knows that for Bach, for Mozart, for Beethoven, even now for Schumann, maybe Brahms, there are some things that might have been different, and an informed performer should take these into account. When it comes to Mahler or Richard Strauss or even Bartók or even Wagner, actually, that doesn't seem to be the case. So that's where we kind of started.
All right, well, good. Well, when we talked a little bit about this the past week or two, we decided we would begin with the instruments because at some point things do change and we can talk a little bit more specifically about them. And we'll move from the instruments to the performances and performance styles. But let's just walk through a couple of examples of instruments and you can comment on them in terms of their evolution or in terms of their specific aspects in relation to performance in Vienna. I think the first one we have here is a trumpet.
Yeah. Before we get into that, let me just say in general for instruments.
Vice President of Mahler Foundation and host, writer, and producer of the Mahler Hour, where we bring you the
What happened?
I don't know. Something happened with the audio. It certainly wasn't me.
Uh, okay. Yeah. So this is a beautiful Heckel trumpet made in Dresden around probably 1900, 1902, something like that. Let me just say in general for the instruments, I think there's a general problem that happens again and again in music history, that composers they try to push the limits of instruments, and from, let's say, Berlioz onwards, they push the limits because they like the limit. They like what the instruments sound like in their most extreme register. They like the precariousness of that sound because they use it very much as an expression of the kind of angst of the Romantic era, angst or grotesqueness or, extreme emotions. That's what they're looking for. So they push these instruments to the borders, and but then the performers, who have to sit on stage and play these pieces with these instruments and their limits, they feel, that they feel unsafe, and just what the composer had been looking for, that feeling of precariousness, they don't enjoy that at all. So what they do is they go to their instrument makers and say, look, there's this new piece by Strauss or this new piece by Mahler, and it goes so high or it goes so low. Can we add a key? Can we change something that I can play this without, hating my job? And, the instrument makers, they comply, they make these new instruments, and indeed they are much easier to play. And, they're seen as kind of a step forward technically, which they are technically. But the next time then these players play these pieces on these new instruments, they lose that sense of the edge, of the precariousness, of the limit, of the extreme. And that is, of course, that's a shame. We have examples of Berlioz where he says, I understand you want to use the new instrument, but please at all times try to imitate the sound of the old instrument. Wagner says the same. Wagner goes through the whole score of Tristan and Isolde and adds points where you should stop the horn sound as you would on a natural horn. I mean, these things are very, very interesting because they want the sound that they grow up with, these composers, but they want to make it extreme. They want to push it. Okay, so that's kind of that's the whole.
And you should hear it. The point is, you should hear it. I mean,
exactly.
It shouldn't be pretty all the time. I mean,
exactly.
You should be experiencing that marginal aspect.
Yes, and like great example is the opening of The Rite of Spring, that bassoon solo, which should sound like, a grotesque kind of or bizarre, at least, or very sort of medieval, weird instrument. And today, they have all mastered it, and the instrument makers have helped, and it sounds beautiful. And
there's the same example in Mahler in the Funeral March of the First Symphony, that high bass part, which is, of course, must have sounded awful at its premiere and for quite some time after. Today, every bass player has to be able to play that, but it's in the wrong register.
And they vibrate it beautifully, and it sounds just lovely. And it could be a cello, or it could be, but it's not what he had in mind.
That's right.
And that's always my point. Like, maybe these composers, or let's say Mahler, would have loved the modern instruments that we have, probably because they are more perfect. I don't know, but it could be. But he would have written differently for these instruments. So if we really want to know where were the limits, what were the sounds, then we have to look at these old instruments. So, okay, so to go back to just as a general, but to go back to the individual instruments, yes, there's the trumpet that you were showing earlier. It's a Heckel trumpet. It's a B flat trumpet. That's an important thing to mention, because Mahler writes for F or B flat trumpet, and we are not sure if he wanted these to be performed on F and on B flat trumpets, or if this was just a writing convention, as you have with horns. Wagner and Richard Strauss continue to write horn in E flat, horn in D, horn in C, when they know it's all going to be played on one horn. So we don't know that. There are a couple of moments where it's obvious that he wasn't thinking of them changing instrument, because the change happened so quickly that it wouldn't be possible. And we also know that The Vienna Opera at that time bought new trumpets, but only B-flat trumpets. So maybe the F trumpet is then out of fashion, although there are a few moments in these symphonies where I think it would be so fascinating to hear that on an F trumpet, but maybe that's then taking it too far. So you have to, always like balance the. What's different about this instrument is that the bore is thinner than on the modern trumpet. The mix of metals is also different. And it's a different kind of valve system. A modern trumpet player can play this instrument, and it is more dangerous to play. It is softer. It has less kind of decibel power, but it has a wonderfully, beautifully mellow and shining, wonderful sound, and it can rasp, can be very brassy at a dynamic well below the modern trumpet. So that can be very useful if you want like a brassy sound, but you don't want it to obliterate everything.
Let's talk about the horns. The horn section, of course, is a major aspect of the sounds of Mahler as well.
Yeah.
And here we're facing actually, in a sense, two worlds, because the Vienna horn is itself a sort of subtype of what that instrument is, and then we're looking at the historical Vienna horn. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll look at the Vienna horn from this period.
Yeah, so this is a Wiener horn, which is an F horn, and it's not a double horn. So basically, you can. So this is a bit technical, and I won't, because I'm not a horn player. I'm always struggling myself to really understand how that works. But basically, you can on the double horn, which is what we call today the French horn. You have basically two instruments in one, and you can switch between them, and so you can have all overtones in a comfortable register, more or less. Okay, it's still a very difficult instrument, I'm not saying, but this instrument is an F horn, so it only has half of the tubing, and a lot of the especially in the higher register, a lot of the harmonics are very, very close to each other, so it's quite dangerous in terms of hitting the right note.
Yeah.
Exactly. What it does have is the most marvelous sound imaginable. In that it is closer to the natural horn, and it has this wonderfully intense, warm sound that's very, very similar also to like gut string cello playing. So it's the perfect horn to me. In this old instrument is it's still a Viennese horn, and Viennese horn players can play it. In fact, a lot of the young Vienna horn players today, they start on these old instruments that maybe, their horn playing grandfather had in the attic. And so we still find them. They're called Genossenschaftshörner, which Genossenschaft it was like all the instrument makers in Vienna at one point joined together, and they became a Genossenschaft, a corporation horns, they're called. The difference here is some of the tubing is actually different, and also the material is different. So they are less perfect in intonation, but they have a darker, even darker sound than the modern ones, and they have, but they also differ very much. If you have 8 of these old horns, they have amongst them different qualities also. You can tell the difference visually from the valves, from where you put the fingers, they're round, whereas the modern Viennese horn, it's more kind of oval.
What about the trombone? Because we're talking now about the same family, but a very different sound. I think we have a trombone here too.
Yeah, so the trombones, these are trumpet and trombones. They are both, this is by a maker named Schott, also in Dresden. I guess Dresden was then the place to have trombones made. You see it has one small rotary valve, so you can you can add a lower register. But basically, in Mahler's orchestra, they had 3 trombones of this kind. So there was no bass trombone. They were all of the same family. Just one player was playing high and one player was playing low, kind of like with horns today. Again, the difference is much less tubing, as you can see, and also the bore is thinner, and the metal is hammered much more thinly. So again, it's less loud, but it can be more aggressive at a lower decibel. So all the brass instruments have kind of this similar characteristics in comparison to the new one.
And then to finish the family here, we'll go to the tuba.
And we go to the tuba, yes. The tuba, I don't know if we get to see it. Yes. So that's a marvelous thing. The tuba is a really completely different instrument. And modern tubas have, I think, 4 valves. This has 6. And our guy, Franz Winkler from Wiener Symphonica, he had to learn this instrument. It took him several months because the fingering is completely different. What's really so wonderful about this instrument is that it's much smaller than these modern huge tubas. I mean, if you see the chair, it's a bit hard because the picture is taken from very close up, but it's not even as large as the chair, and it's about like maybe two-thirds of the size of a modern tuba. What it does, and this is something that I now find really difficult to bear with modern instruments, it integrates into the brass sound perfectly. So you have a perfectly balanced brass sound, whereas I now feel that in modern orchestras, the tuba just kind of sticks out. It's too loud, and it doesn't mix very well with the trombone. So that's why then they added a bass trombone, so that you would have an instrument that kind of relates the trombones to the tuba, but then you start changing everything, and then the bass is much too strong, brass is too strong, etc., etc. So this instrument is really perfect in that context, and it's the instrument that of course Mahler knew, that Richard Strauss knew, that certainly that Bruckner knew, and I think there are a few players in Vienna who want to. I think that's also why our player was interested. They want to bring it back to the modern orchestra because they feel that, especially for this repertoire, it's really the more befitting instrument.
Let's go to percussion. We have speaking of loud, or something not, maybe perhaps back then not as loud, the timpani.
Yeah, so these are timpani made by Schneller. Sorry, first name escapes me. It's a lapsus, but you can look him up. Schneller was the principal timpanist of the Vienna Phil and of the Vienna Opera during Mahler's time. And he invented this system where when you turn the handle, you tighten the skins by lifting the entire drum. You can see that the turn goes down all the way to the bottom of the drum, and then it lifts the drum, and it comes up while the skins stay in place. And you can kind of tell from the rim, it goes up a bit to where the drum meets the skin. What this does is, I mean, in terms of physics, you can look it up there. There are several studies, but it just makes a wonderfully clear sound sound that's reminiscent more of kind of classical drums, where the timpani are part of the bass line, and they play kind of the bass line to the trumpets. And these timpani can do that, and but at the same time they're quite large, and they can be very loud and quite attacking. Mahler loved these instruments. He loved them so much that when he went to Amsterdam to conduct there, he asked Schneller to accompany him. I think he also liked the guy, but Schneller always then came along. The Concertgebouw eventually also ordered timpani from him. To this day, they play Schneller timpani. The system has now been bought by Adams. timpani, and in Vienna you have different companies who still make them. But this is a pair of original Schneller timpani that Schneller made himself for himself to be played in the opera. And that's kind of that's the one instrument where we are sure that that was played in concerts and in performances that Mahler conducted.
Fascinating. Then the bass drum, we hear a lot of that as well.
Yeah, bass drum, it was just much smaller. It was much smaller, and it was used, you might be able to see it. It was used on a wooden stand, which we had made by a carpenter in Toblach, just before the performance, because we realized that's what they used. And that has a wonderful effect. Again, it's not a kind of a whooshy, woomy kind of sound, but it can be very direct. Because it's small, but the wooden stand kind of amplifies the sound of it, so that it makes up for the for the smaller size. And it has on the top, it has this little thing where you can attach a cymbal, so you can do like military band style cymbal and bass drum playing, which Mahler calls for in the fifth for sure, because he wants that sort of sound. It should really sound like a military band, and this instrument allows us to do that. I did see a picture of a much larger bass drum that he used for the Eighth Symphony, but I'm not sure what that was, but we know that this instrument was what they had in the Vienna Opera. So until 1907, at least, that's what Mahler knew. Interestingly, the hammer in the Sixth Symphony, that was originally a huge bass drum that Mahler had kind of designed himself and had constructed, which I think was square, weirdly, and he was imagining that would be a huge thing, but it had no sound at all, didn't work at all. So he abandoned the idea. I think he insisted on it for a while, but then because it cost a lot of money to build and all that, but then he abandoned the idea, and they came up with a hammer, which of course is also a bit of theater. But interesting to know that when he wrote the piece, he didn't have that hammer in mind.
Well, no one had that sonority. I mean, he was kind of dreaming of it, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Let's talk about one more family. We have a lot to go through here, but we want to show just a couple of the woodwinds.
Yes.
The winds are an amazingly important family as well, and they too have gone through some transformations that we want to, at least in two cases, talk a little bit about. The first one is the oboe.
So
and
here,
we have a Viennese aspect to consider as well.
Yeah. Can you just go back one picture? Because it's a nice. This is our woodwind section, and you see the bass drum better. You see how not big it is, how small it is. And so you see all the flutes are wooden flutes. The clarinets in boxwood. An old German bass clarinet, very, very thin. And yes, indeed, the oboes. So let's go to those. To the next picture. It's a Viennese oboe. Again, modern Viennese oboe players can play it. It's different. Some of the keys are different. It has, and when you play it, you kind of know immediately why it was changed. There are a couple of notes that in terms of intonation cannot be in tune. But it's thinner than the modern instrument. Again, the bore is different, the thickness of the wood is different, which makes for an even more kind of straight and slightly piercing sound, more like a shawm, and a kind of an extreme sound, yet very kind of dark and lovely. So I think this is a beautiful, beautiful instrument. It's based, so the Viennese oboe is based on do you want the whole story?
We've got to move on, I'm afraid. We have too many instruments. We still have the flute to talk about.
It's basically based on a Baroque oboe that a player brought from Dresden to Vienna and then adopted it to. Then the flute this is a Louis Lot, a beautiful, beautiful Louis Lot flute, which is an instrument that the Vienna Philharmonic's first flutist was playing at the time. He was a Dutchman, one of the first foreigners in the Vienna Philharmonic, hired by Mahler. And he played a Louis Lot, and this is Böhm system. So that means it's the modern system that at this time is starting to really be adopted everywhere, and there are lots of new pieces at this time that can only be played on a Böhm system flute. Mahler writes in the score of the Third Symphony, first flute in parentheses Böhm system. So he knows exactly what he wants here. The Vienna Philharmonic at that time were playing all German system flutes, and this is in our setup kind of the one point where we had to make a compromise, because Mahler wanted the whole section to change to wooden Böhm system flutes, and he had them bought for them, the Louis Lot, but then cheaper ones for the other players, which we found exactly the ones that the Rittenhouse, we bought 4 of those, and the piccolos as well. But then the players had a summer to learn the new system, but then after the summer they came back and they refused, because they said it was too difficult, and they refused to do that. So they had to continue to play with one Böhm system and the rest German system. And then as these players retired later on, the Vienna Philharmonic then changed to everyone to Böhm system, and eventually they also all played silver flutes. But at this time they were all playing wooden flutes. The principal who played the Louis Lot was playing a silver flute, a silver Louis Lot. We made this compromise that we said, okay, that clearly that wasn't ideal. So let's do all Böhm flutes, Böhm system flutes as Mahler wanted, but let's make them all wooden because it's just a more unified sound. And that's what Mahler had in mind by buying. We know that because he bought all these wooden Böhm flutes for his players.
You found a recording of the of Mahler's flutist Leuven, who came from Holland, as you said. Let's listen to a little bit of his performance here, and we can comment on that.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, I think we'll stop there. I really hate to stop, but we do have to move on.
Yeah.
Philip,
Look,
comment on the sound here, if you would.
Yeah, I just before I comment on the sound, I just want to point out this recording was made in 1905, and maybe right after making this recording, maybe he went to the opera and played with Mahler conducting. I think that's just such a wonderful little thought that can bring that time closer to us, no? So yeah, very interesting, very beautiful player. It's not a powerful sound at all. He plays with no apparent vibrato. There's a little tremor, but that stems more from his just, it's like his diaphragm technique. But you wouldn't, and this is recorded with a big with a microphone like right there, but one of these mechanical microphones that they had at the time. So in the concert hall, in the Musikverein, you certainly wouldn't hear any vibrato from this player. So I think that's very interesting. Also, actually interesting piano accompaniment, super free and not rhythmical at all. He does beautiful, beautiful phrasing. He's a very elegant player, I think. My musicians, my wife is a flutist. She plays also in our project. Yeah, she can also tell that technique has improved, has moved on. But he's also she has used this recording a lot when getting used to this Louis Lot flute, because because this is an instrument that's not very loud, and modern players, again, they can just pick it up and play it, but they will try to play louder on it than this instrument allows them to. And so what you need to do with these old instruments is you need to find, you mustn't force them. You need to find where they open up, where they develop the most overtones, and then start to feel comfortable there. In the modern orchestra, that's what we all felt. We are so used to forcing all the time, really, really playing loud. And these instruments, they will just break if you do that to them. So you need to, and you know, in the thick of it, in the middle of a fast movement of a Mahler symphony, that's really, really hard to do, to discipline yourself and be and respect the instrument. But when it works, yes, it works wonders.
We have another example, and this is a woodwind section from Brahms's Third Symphony. We're listening to Karl Kraus conducting the Vienna Philharmonic, and this says a little bit about the tradition of this type of performance going into the 1920s in the orchestral setting.
Yes. So what you can hear really clearly is I like this example because it starts with horn and clarinet, two instruments that until this day play without vibrato. But then he pairs oboe and horn, and indeed the oboe also doesn't vibrate, and it mixes really, really well. And so that shows us that Van Leuven's vibrato-less playing was completely in style, and it allows these wonderful mixed sounds. The vibrato makes the sound more kind of individual, but if you dare to play without, you can find these mixed sounds that are just so attractive. And I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but the way that Kraus, think of the man and his Nazi, whatever, but the way he extends here the phrasing and the rubato, it's just masterful. And these players, they can deliver. They know how to do this. And a lot of these players were players that were, hired by Mahler, some, whatever, 12 years before. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful example. And today we have this strange situation where you have, yes, clarinet doesn't vibrate, horn doesn't vibrate, everybody else vibrates. I mean, already that should say something. No, that can't be right. Interestingly, the Vienna Philharmonic, they have, or had, I should say, a tradition of non-vibrating bassoons. When I was subbing with them 20 years ago, whatever it was, the older players were not vibrating whatsoever. That's also changing now. But in Vienna, for some reason, these things survive much longer than in other places.
Yeah, there are these amazing moments in Mahler where you hear the flute and the horn that are paired. There are these incredible combinations in Mahler's ear that, of course, if you're talking about those differences in sonority, would make for a very different experience.
Well, exactly. But you then have to find a different way of being expressive. And today, and that's one of the things that we learned from our project, is that today expressive, I mean, you know it, like conductors, when they want espressivo, they do this, no? Espressivo means play louder or vibrate more. But that can be, those can be expressive tools, but there are many more tools for expressiveness, but we'll get into. And we just want to open that toolbox and see what else is there.
Well, speaking of vibrato, we've got to turn to the strings, of
Yeah.
course, and we have a few wonderful examples of that. Differences in string playing and differences in the instrument
Yeah.
too. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so string instruments were basically in terms of setup, in terms of like angle of the fingerboard to the and all of those things, or thickness of the bass bar, they were as they are today, more or less. Bows also, modern bows. I mean, the modern bow was invented by Tourte, like before the French Revolution. So modern bow is also a bit of a euphemism here, but okay. Modern times, I guess. The What's really different is that they used gut strings, of course. But it doesn't mean that they were all naked gut strings. The lower strings have, especially for cello, but also for the violin, for the G string for the violin, the two lower strings for the cello, and the three lower strings for double basses have always been wound strings, because you cannot twist gut that much that it will produce the tension that's required. So that's always been a technique that was always there. In the 50 years that gut strings were not used basically anywhere, we unfortunately lost the technique because the companies that were making them then went bankrupt, and there was Second World War in between. So some of the knowledge has gone, actually, how they made these strings. Sometimes you find an old bass string and then they look what they put like silk in between. And okay, so they had gut strings. Sorry, I get carried away. It's so wonderful. And they used wooden mutes, which you can still buy today, but like players don't like to use them because they can fall down the stand and they make noise, and and they don't stay on the instrument. So you have to sit on them, or you have to have them in your pocket or something. Because I have found that orchestras, when I ask for wooden mutes, they say, "Oh, you can't buy them anymore. In our town you can't find." So I usually travel with a set that I can then pull out of my hat to their amusement.
Let's talk about one more string instrument, and we have a photo of that, and that is the harp, and that's of course a key sonority in Mahler's symphonies as well.
So these are two beautiful Erard harps from the early 20th century, 1905 and 1907, I think, respectively. They are, again, that's hard to see now. They are much smaller than modern harps. They have the same mechanism with whatever it is, I think 6 or 7 pedals. And they were invented by Erard company. Ravel famously wrote his introduction in the Allegro for this instrument as a kind of a showpiece, what it could do. Modern harps have a much bigger sound body. I don't know what the term here is. I only corpus in German, but I don't. And they are used with nylon strings, or actually a mix. I think they have wound lower strings, then gut strings in the middle, and then nylon on top. And of course, the old harp was all gut string. So it's a more plucky sound. It's a less loud sound, but it's a sound that's more kind of articulated. I often think, like, with a modern harp, you only need one. Mahler sometimes has, like in the Ninth Symphony, also in the Fifth, he says it's just one harp part, but then he says several players. With these instruments, it becomes clear in the tutti you need more than one, otherwise you just won't hear it. Yeah. I want to. I just want to, because I got carried away with the strings. But because you asked for playing techniques, the big difference was that they played with much less vibrato than people do today. They played with some vibrato, and we also have a pretty good idea where and how they vibrated. But that's, of course, very complicated to teach or to implement, because vibrato is something that becomes very kind of automatic for a player. And so we basically we gave them all the information, but we also wrote in on every note if it had vibrato or not, and how much of the note was vibrated, because otherwise it would have deteriorated into generic vibrato immediately. The other difference, yeah, sorry.
Let's hear an example of this, because you've shared a wonderful recording with a very famous violinist from the time, Marie Soldau-Röger, And let's just listen to her technique. Just a fantastic, I mean, that the clarity of that line and the almost voice-like quality of her tone is
Isn't that so
incredible.
wonderful? Wonderful, wonderful playing. And you know, if you think this was a singer, if this was Maria Callas, it wouldn't be off-putting at all.
Right.
But I still remember when I first heard this, and I was like, "Gee, this is, you know, it's far out. This is really, really extreme." And I mean, to be fair, she's playing here the Spohr concerto, which she worked on with Joachim, who had studied with Spohr. So she's also, you know, emanating a style that's then one of a bygone period. However, you can tell that she's a very, very strong player. She makes no mistakes. Marvelous, marvelous position playing. She has a beautifully drawn sound. The bow is always intensely in the string, which is something that the gut strings allow you to do or make you do. Something I love. I was hinting at that with the horn. The Viennese horn has that quality also. And this is, you know, she was a very famous violinist in her time. She played the Beethoven concerto with Mahler with the Vienna Philharmonic. She was in a quartet with, I guess all your listeners know, Nathalie
Well,
Bauer-Lechner.
we have a photo of her quartet because she also led a world famous quartet, and you will probably all recognize. I've already spoken about her. The violist who's to the far left there, next to Marie Soldat. That's Nathalie Bauer-Lechner.
Exactly, and you know, we are so grateful to for her for everything she has written about Mahler and her diaries, and that's such a wealth of information, and which is so wonderful. And she was in a quartet with Marie Soldat, so that kind of, you know, and then she would go on these summer vacations with the Mahler siblings, and you know, and she would of course practice in the next room, and that was the style of playing, and that's what Mahler knew, and that's what he liked, and it's what he expected. And I mean, yeah, Brahms, obviously different generation, but he said he preferred her Brahms concerto to that of Joachim's. So, but and her recordings are so valuable because her style is probably the closest to what Joachim sounded like, and of Joachim there are only tiny recordings that are very hard to hear, and he was way past his prime. But this is probably what he sounded like, and it's an example of the so-called German school, German string playing school, which everybody was playing like in Russia and in Austria and Germany, and which was then started to be in competition with the Franco-Belgian school of, you know, Isaïe and these people who vibrated much more, just different style of playing. And you know, but today we all play Franco-Belgian school, and the German school has actually died out. Nobody does
We
this
do have
anymore.
another recording of someone very close to Mahler, and that is a recording of Arnold Rosé, who was Mahler's brother-in-law, of course, and who also played for him as the concertmaster of the Vienna Philharmonic. I know we could talk a lot about that as well. Of course, the similarity to Maria Solar is there. It's a little bit of a different style, maybe more modern, as you mentioned to me the other day. But we have to talk a little bit about portamento, don't we?
Yes,
The glissando between the pitches, because that's something that also is a true standout of these two performances.
I was going to say elephant in the room. I mean, they do lots of portamento, which is the, I don't know if all your listeners know this, it's the audible sliding that modern string players are taught to kind of avoid mostly. And it's a different technique of shifting where you shift with a finger in between. You always shift with the finger that you start the old finger. It doesn't matter. It's a technical thing, but it makes it sound very different. There's a French way of sliding where you slide into the note, which basically for any Austrian German player would have been, so tasteless. And like you can do that, it's some gypsy band, but definitely not in serious music. And in France, they were all doing it. So, and that's what we do today also. That's the kind of sliding we do today. But they were sliding much, much more. And it was a kind of, they thought of sliding as a kind of left-hand legato. As singers do today. It helped to connect the line and it was such an important tool. And someone who had beautiful portamento was, Joachim talks about the correct style, which is when you play all the notes, and then he talks about the beautiful style when you add portamento and vibrato and rubato, and you add all of these things, and then it becomes beautiful. And it seems to me that often today we play correct, and we forget these wonderful, wonderful tools. But you need to get used to it again. It's interesting how that works. But yeah,
You
also I
mentioned
think,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, interesting that Rosé vibrates quite a bit here, almost continuous vibrato. But there are films of him in the orchestra where he vibrates very, very little and only in beginnings of notes. So that's also something that's so important to keep in mind. There was a different way of playing in orchestra and in solo. And all the violin schools that survive and all the evidence, the written down evidence is always for solo playing. And nobody really tells you what it's like in the orchestra. And there we know from a few people, Anna Bilsmann, for example, his father was principal cellist in the in the Concertgebouw in the 20s, and when he arrived on the job and started vibrating, the guy next to him stopped his hand with his bow and said, "We play orchestra sound, not solo sound." So it was a big thing, and today everybody plays solo sound in the orchestra.
Yeah. That's a fascinating observation, and of course, we think of those as equivalent, but they're not. And you mentioned another characteristic, and we want to give a few examples of this. We're really running into time here, but it's so fascinating. I really want the audience to hear the notion of rubato, the free use of time, and perhaps the most famous example of this happening in Mahler is with Mahler himself. You are all probably familiar with this. Let's listen to Mahler on the piano playing Das himmlische Leben, at least a part of this recording. let's I know that I know that this is Mahler being asked to play on a piano. This is a piano roll recording that people had asked about technical deficiency in actually recording it. He was a fine pianist as a teenager, and we can talk all around the issue of this not being a perfect performance. But I think what's important here is that almost no two measures are the same when it comes to
Yes.
the tempo.
Exactly. Like the question is, what can we learn from this recording? Rather than to explain why it's different from today and how we like it, what was different? And uh, you know, so you notice left and right hand are never together, not once. And there's the accompaniment often stays in one tempo while the right hand goes its own way. And this is something that they used and that they practiced a lot, because that's hard to do. And it's something that was really, really expected of musicians. And also there's so many wonderful details just now I was thinking. But yeah, you can tell where he's not, he's probably not practicing piano that much. He plays all the time, but not practicing. But you can exactly tell when that's the case. But there's lots of stuff where he has no difficulty at all. And it's just the way he plays. And when it's when there's a crescendo, of course he gets faster, and when there's a diminuendo, he gets slower, and tempo never stays the same. It's constantly shifting, and it's also shifting between the hands. And they don't think of music as like 16th together, but they think of music as lines that move, at the same time, but which should have their own expressivity. And
Yeah.
just think da 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 ba ba, how he shortens that rhythm. He makes the rhythm so much more expressive that way, and it's something you can't notate. But they just knew, and
That makes you wonder too, what in terms of that being the practice, how much Mahler was assuming that would be respected. And of course, it's very different today. We can't ask him what he feels about this now. But we know others were doing it too. We have another recording here of Richard Strauss, his colleague, who here is was conducting Tristan. And again, listen to the tempo variation in this short segment. Okay, we can stop there.
oh man,
Again, the surging, meeting faster.
man, I love this recording. I think it's so exciting. It's so expressive, and there's so much in this music. And Richard Strauss, of course, was a student of Hans von Bülow. Hans von Bülow had conducted the world premiere of the piece from memory. And he had done it exactly as Wagner had told him to do it. And so this is probably the closest we get to that freedom that Wagner was so famous for as a conductor, and that also Mahler tried to, he felt about music in that same way, and he loved Bülow. He really revered I don't know if he loved him, but he really revered him. And so yeah, and there you also hear in this recording, you hear the sliding, you hear the vibrato-less wind playing, so it's all there. I think that's a marvelous, marvelous example of how, yeah, maybe it wasn't technically as, perfect as today, but boy, was it exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to ask our audience to bear with us. We have more material, and I don't want everyone to run away at the top of the hour, but I'm going to change a little bit the sequence of what we're going to talk about. Philipp, I want everyone to listen to some examples from your performance with your orchestra of the Mahler's Ninth Symphony. But before that, I want to just tell us a little bit about this organization, how it came about, and then we'll get to the recordings
Yeah.
a little bit after that.
So, I'm a conductor. I'm also a cellist, and I was, I was in the Lucerne Festival Orchestra with Abado when Abado did all the whole Mahler cycle that's now all over YouTube, and it was such a strong experience, just so wonderful. At the same time, I was also playing Baroque cello. I was playing with the English Baroque soloists with the Orchestre Révolutionnaire Romantique of John A. Gardiner, and as a conductor, I became Gardiner's assistant, also Abado's assistant, and so the to bring that kind of rigor of of the old instruments and of that sort of thinking to Mahler became more and more kind of obvious to me. Also because there are lots of moments where you as a cellist you've been playing for an hour and suddenly there's a note and it says vibrato or something, and you're like, well, what now? I've been doing this for an hour. So where you just moments where it's clear that okay, this was probably meant in a different way, or these, because you said for what he expected, what he would have expected, where he writes things in his score for musicians that are different musicians than we are today. And so the idea became to find out how were they different. So then it's a long story because it was supposed to go ahead in Toblach as a standalone project, but then COVID hit. After COVID, the funding got slashed. Disappointing times. But then we found a way to bring this to life anyway, together with the Gustav Mahler Academy in Bolzano, which is this wonderful creation by Abado, which I'm running, and to give these young people a sense of what's behind music, when you start to ask questions. But the way we did it is that we bring 50 young students together with 50 pros from, all the wonderful orchestras, from the Concertgebouw, from the Vienna Symphony, Vienna Phil, Berlin Phil, Staatskapelle Dresden, Mahler Chamber Orchestra, of course, wonderful, wonderful group of people, Orchestre de Paris, and so on. And they sit side by side with these young people, and they all together have to learn this new style. They all have instruments that they don't know or gut strings. They all get lots of information that they have to process. They get historic information as well. What was it like? And they get lots and lots and lots and lots of evidence. And then we rehearse it and we practice and we try to apply things we learn from old recordings or from books. We try to apply to music that hasn't been recorded then, and try to make it work. And we realized that we all felt kind of liberated and freed, and it's a wonderful wonderful project and a wonderful process. And the other hugely important partner in this is the foundation, Grand Hotel Gustav Mahler Dolomites in Toblach, because when we first thought it would be a project only there, they spend a lot of money buying these instruments. And so we bought a lot of these instruments so we can give them to the students to play, because you can't ask, a 20-year-old student to buy a bassoon for 15,000 euros that he's then going to play once every 2 years. So we did that. And so we have the perfect instruments, and we know which instruments. That was an important step also, because but your people know this, that it's been researched by Beatrix Darmstädter, which instruments the Vienna Philharmonic bought during the time that Mahler was at the opera.
And with her information, you actually were able to trace some of these down and purchase them for the project, some of them. Is that true?
Yes, exactly. So it was really helpful to know which instruments he had, and Miss Darmstädter was also so helpful in pointing out tiny differences in the keys, and then we looked everywhere. Lots of eBay and Willhaben, which is the Austrian equivalent, Mostly we looked in Austria, but a lot of the flutes we also found in America because that company happened to sell a lot of flutes to America that were the same make though. Uh, we found we found things in attics of old bandas in Oberösterreich and but also in collections, but basically the ones that they have in museums usually you can't use because they don't get restored because they should stay the way they are. They're not to be played, but to be measured or to be researched, but not to be. So we had to find our own instruments. Then we restored them, and our musicians learned to play them, and here we are.
So your first project, as I understand it, was to record Mahler's Ninth Symphony. Why did you start with this piece?
I mean, what's not to like, right? No, the ninth. So because it came out of the Toblach idea. We wanted it to be a piece that was written there, just to make like kind of it was written here. This is what he might have heard in his head, that sort of thing. But apart from kind of the gimmicky thought of that, there is this wonderful recording with the Vienna Phil from '38 with Bruno Walter, and that's a recording where Rosé is still concertmaster, and some of the players that played in the premiere played. Of course, things have already changed. There is more vibrato, there is less portamento than must have been, whatever, 26 years before. But of course, it's a very, very helpful. It's a very helpful tool. I have to say that the longer we researched and started to really think about it ourselves, the less this recording was important in a way. So it was a way into that sound world, but once we felt that we were in it, we all started to listen to it much less actually. But I think if you compare our recording and that recording, there will definitely be some things that you notice sound similar.
When you're playing this music from this perspective, with in some ways new ears and new perspective and a new awareness of almost every aspect, what did you learn about the music? Did the score change for you somehow?
Yes. But first of all, I should say not everything is different. It's recognizable throughout, and
Of course.
some things sound quite similar to modern playing, especially if you have a hall with some reverberation. Uh, um, but some things sound definitely very different. And okay, what I learned mostly is he is an even better composer than I knew because the balances are always right. You never need to tinker. You never need to reduce brass. That's always perfect.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see why he very often writes stronger dynamic for the horns because they are much less loud than the modern horns. So that makes complete sense. He uses his instruments very wisely, and the super soft flute he uses only in extremely delicate moments. Or if he wants something crazy, then he will give one note to 4 or 5 flutes together really loud, but it will be a shrill and weird thing. So he's very, very wise about the combination of instruments but also their characters, and the whole aspect of what Adorno calls the plebeian material in his music, the kind of the grotesque or the popular, which was so rejected at the time. I feel that a lot of performers, even also Bruno Walter, actually, they don't go for this because they wanted to make this music more acceptable, I guess, which I mean, bless them. I totally get it, but that's kind of become it's Mahler is now so elegant all the time, and I was always thinking like, so how do you decide like where do you go for the grotesque? With these instruments, I didn't need to decide anything. It just happens. When he wants it to be that way, it is that way. And so that was such a relief during the because I felt like this is such an important part, which I don't necessarily have strong instincts for. How do I do this? And I didn't need to do anything because it was all there.
It's all the more remarkable because Mahler never heard this music performed. He wasn't alive for the premiere. It was all in his head. And to nail the balance in that way, of course, is something one can't really appreciate until you can recreate those sonorities. Well, let's have a listen, Philipp. I want to go directly to
Yes.
maybe a segment from the first movement. Maybe we'll start with the opening of the symphony in your recording with the Mahler Academy of Mahler's Ninth Symphony, the first movement opening. Oh, so many things to say. Tell me what strikes you most about the opening. For me, it's the transparency. It's just the absolute transparency of all those lines. And the strings, of course, the way they interact is so much more clear to me. And then the proportion of the balance of the strings, because since they're not vibrating, since they're of a different technique, they're not overwhelming the other instruments as well. So the clarity is just extraordinary.
You know, they are vibrating some actually, but it was always important for us to find a group sound that's pure, where you don't hear vibrato doesn't become, you know, the foreground kind of. So what really strikes me, I mean, I haven't listened to this. I have listened to this recording so many times to, you know, to find all the faults and whatever, that it's, and this music is just so powerful and it just doesn't get old at all. That really strikes me the most. But just now I was listening, because if you listen, when you know other people are listening as well, you listen differently, you know? And so what I also really like actually was how how free, especially that second violin theme in the beginning, how free that is, and how it's surging, and how it's not staying with the big beat. It always finds it again, but they often come in early to bring in. That's something we learned from that Bruno Walter recording. They do that all the time. The second violins come in early to show that they are, important theme. So you don't come exactly on the beat, but tiny bit early. People are like, oh, what are they doing? And these kind of tricks, but also the articulation, da dum be, these kind of when you have two notes under slur that you shorten the second one. I think it adds so much of a kind of speaking quality to this music. And then when the brass comes in and the timpani, it shakes you to the core. And yeah.
Extraordinary.
I love the warmth of the string sound, and yet I think it sounds silvery and so delicate at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the gut strings.
I may be asking a question that the audience wants to know too. This is a recording that will be released, question mark, and when and how do people get a hold of it?
Yeah. Okay. So this is coming out on Alpha Classics in June, I think around the 20th. And then it will be, you can buy it. I mean, there are no record stores left, but you can certainly order it from them, or it will be on all the platforms.
Great.
Will be, yeah. So we are very, very happy that they accepted this, because we sent them the ready tape, and we were so pleased that they, for these companies to actually listen to something, difficult, and they want to record more Mahler. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I can highly recommend it to anyone who wants to really delve into this piece more. I have to ask about your next project, which is going to be the Fifth Symphony of Mahler. What made you choose Mahler's Fifth?
Okay, so for the next, so when we did the ninth, we invited a few people who we thought could be interested in this project, and some of them came, and indeed they are interested. So we thought of a tour. So we're going to again rehearse in Toblach, and we play in Bolzano, where our academy is. But then we go to the Concerthaus in Vienna, and we go to the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam as kind of overture to their Mahler Fest, but like many months before. But that's how they announced it. And we go to the Philharmonie in Köln and to the Philharmonie in Paris. And it was just talking to these promoters. We talked about different pieces. There aren't that many. And the fifth was something they all thought would be just so wonderful. And I agree. I think it's a piece that has so many idiosyncrasies and where it's the first of the mature kind of the mature Mahler. So and it's a piece where he struggled a lot to get the counterpoint right and get the sonorities right. So then I think it would be really interesting to see. So what was it then? What did he really have in mind?
Right.
And it's a great piece.
So the orchestra and this mindfulness can also reveal maybe new things about this score too. As you say, it's a very important shift in his style in 1902 as he moves to the Fifth Symphony, which he had a great deal of trouble with orchestrally. We're over time, and I want to ask you a little bit about the future. You're clearly successful in getting people interested in hearing this, because now with that major tour coming up, you'll also be doing a performance with Leif Ove Ansnes on a historical instrument, playing the Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. I'm sure that will also raise a lot of interest in terms of.
It will be it's on the same program, actually. It's the same. Before the break, we do the Rachmaninoff Third. Leif Ove heard this recording, and he said he wanted to do something together, and we both think that it's a really good match because, well, first of all, Mahler conducted that concerto with Rachmaninoff on the piano in New York. But also, if you think about like Rachmaninoff's kind of musical socialization in Moscow and St. Petersburg, the musicians he would have met there would have been trained German style. So you know, he didn't play with the Vienna Philharmonic, but this kind of playing wouldn't have, that's what he grew up with as well. And Rachmaninoff is, it's also music that's like hyper emotional, very kind of thickly orchestrated, or can be, which I think would definitely benefit from this approach. And then there are these very interesting recordings by himself that are very different from how people play this today. I think there's lots of stuff to discover.
Absolutely. It's very exciting. And I think that kind of encapsulates your ideas of the future. It sounds like this is really just the beginning of something very exciting as we move forward in time and maybe discover new repertories and certainly new aspects of Mahler.
Yes, it is. And exactly. So we are thinking now, like, what are the next pieces we want to do, what to pair it with. We also look at Bartók, we look at Janacek, but always in connection to Mahler. And Mahler is kind of the central thought of this and the central column of this project. That's for sure.
I am going to turn to the questions, Philip. I know we're over time again, but I do have some some eager questions. I have a lot of them from Sixtus Beckmesser at Mahler Foundation. And it's important, and this was in my script for today, but we haven't covered it. Let's talk a little bit about the layout of the orchestra and how the divided violins were used, and of course cellos on the left, violas on the right, etc. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, I mean it's the old Vienna setup. It's on all I think all the, I don't want to say all the pictures that I know of Mahler in front of an orchestra, the orchestra is laid out like that, except in Rome. But anyways, that wasn't a very happy experience apparently. And it's how the Vienna Philharmonic played. I think the divided first violins, I think they're really essential in Mahler. This is also something I always did it this way, but now I understand why it's essential. In the Ninth Symphony, there's so much stuff where first and second violins play in each one in their own universe, and with different rubato in our, just so wonderful. But when they come together, that's always the holy moment for him. And he says it somewhere to Bauer Lechner, that he says, I don't know what it is, but when they all play together, it develops a shine that's indescribable, something like that, he says. So this is something that's really important to him, and that certainly doesn't happen when half of them sit kind of behind the other half. So how do you then have a dialogue? That there's no democracy in that, and Mahler is a very democratic composer in that sense. So I think that's really essential. The basses in the back are beautiful because they give kind of, especially with this, where you have less of a brass bass and the whole thing is a little bit less loud. They give a wonderful backdrop for the whole thing. And then what did we do? Yeah, we had the horns on the right side. That's something that the Vienna Philharmonic still often does today. And that's also, I saw on the pictures of the premiere of the Eighth Symphony, the brass is on that side. We divided timpani, that because I know that he did that sometimes. I thought that was attractive. And otherwise it's otherwise there are no big changes. We will see for the fifth if we place the harp somewhere special. And I think we definitely have to place the horn in front, which is something that Mengelberg did. And I guess he got it from Mahler himself. Mahler took the Vienna horn player Franz Stiegler with him when he conducted the Fifth Symphony as a soloist, only for that movement. So it makes sense that he would have him there. And I also have an idea why he did that, but would
we can get into that maybe some other time. I have another question regarding rubato, and we'll have to make this short too. But how do you make decisions about rubato, and for that matter, portamento?
Okay, so it's something that you just have to do a lot and then develop a taste for, and maybe do too much in the beginning and then reduce. Rubato, there are just many ways of expressing a musical figure. Basically, if you feel it surges forward, let it surge forward, and then wait until the others arrive, or start it late so you can do it faster. Never take rhythms at face value. Always see if you can shorten them, if you can make them more characteristic. Don't be afraid if it's not totally together. It's not what he has in mind. Expressiveness is completely key. Yeah, it ruled.
Well, I want to thank you for being our guest today, Philipp. It's been fascinating, and I know there was material we had to cut for now. Maybe we can get back to that sometime. Thank you so much for opening our ears, and I do hope people really have a chance to listen more thoroughly to your work with this Academy Orchestra.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And obviously, this is a project I'm very proud of, also of these young people, wonderful young players. It's so nice if that meets interest and if people are interested. And yeah, and as you can tell, I can talk about this until doomsday. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The Mahler Hour is brought to you by Mahler Foundation and contributors around the world as a monthly streaming event bringing together individuals interested in the composer, the thinker, the humanist Gustav Mahler, as we explore not only his life and works, but also how his legacy still informs essential aspects of the human experience and how we can turn that experience into a force for the good in today's world. Become a member and support our activities. I want to thank my guest, Philipp von Steinaecker, for joining us today, as well as our production team, Marco Ayala, and Monica Angianov, our Executive Director for Administration. The Mahler Hour is back next month on the 16th of March with a program we had to postpone from November. Thomas Hampson will be my co-host as we begin a series taking us on a journey through the songs of Gustav Mahler. We begin with the early works, discussing everything from manuscripts to text sources and to performance issues. It'll be a lot of fun. I hope you can join us. That's our program for today. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.